Okay, let's get started. All right, everybody. Let's start the second Aliyah, Mishpatim. It's long, in case you're wondering. So, v'chiyaki yeshasavdei aseh b'shevet. If a man hits his servant, maid servant, b'shevet, with a stick, and the servant, the maid servant, dies because of the blow, because of that, corporal punishment. Nokim yinokim, he or she must be avenged. 20. When a man hits a servant, maid. Yesterday we learned about there's two types of servants. One is called a Eved Ivri, a Jewish servant. One is called the Eved Knani, a non-Jewish servant. And there's different laws of how much they're owned, or whatever you call it, how much control the master has. So, if a man hits his, what are we talking about? When it says it's a servant, let's say if it's a Jewish or non-Jewish servant. So Rashi says we are talking about a non-Jewish servant. Well, but how do you know? Maybe it's a Hebrew servant, which would mean different. Just there's different categories of servant, different laws. So how do you know it's not a non-Jewish servant? So he says kikaspehu. Later in the verse, it's going to say this servant is his monetary property. Just as the monetary property is something that is owned forever, so too we're talking about a type of servant that is owned, fully owned, which is a forever owned, which is a non-Jewish Canaanite servant. Now, was not this case included in the general statement? Wait a second. It says elsewhere, if you kill somebody, you get put to death. So why would this be any different? Why does the Torah have to single out the case of an Hebrew, a Canaanite servant, a non-Jewish servant? They get that there's capital punishment if you kill it. Rather, the Torah is coming to single it out in order to apply a specific detail about the law of 1 or 2 days, which we'll learn in the next verse, which is very short, that if this servant does not die immediately, rather it lives 24 hours healthfully, it dies after, then the master is exempt. Bashevet, with a staff. When a man, so the verse said, if you hit the servant with a stick, so Rashi says it's a stick we're talking that has the capacity to kill, like a metal crowbar or something. Not a metal crowbar, but like a serious stick. So Rashi, how do you know it's that? Maybe it's the case of a stick that doesn't have the ability to kill. The verse says elsewhere, if he struck him with a fist-sized stone that can cause death and he died, he must be put to death. We can learn from this a kal v'chomer, a fortiori argument. If when you kill a Jew, right, which is as a higher culpability for killing a fellow Jew, then you still are only liable if you use a weapon that has the capacity to kill. To use a branch, it's not really has the possibility to kill. Then if you hurt him, you're guilty for hurting him, but we don't attribute the final death blow towards your puny weapon. So too, for sure, a slave that has less rights, you have to, you would not be guilty if you used a puny club of some sort. It has to be a club that has the capacity to kill for you to be liable for killing him. Nakim yinakim, he must be avenged. This is referring to capital punishment. What type? Rashi says, Misa Sayif. This is the death by sword, execution by sword. So too, elsewhere it talks about the idea of nakama, vengeance, in the terms of a sword. Chaf Aleph 21. So it goes on this case where the master beat the slave and caused his death. So it says if he causes death and he dies directly, then he's liable. But 21, if he does not cause direct death, the servant remains alive for 1 or 2 days, then he's not, the master is not put to death, for it is the slave was owned by the master. Rashi says, why telling 1 or 2 days? Like just 1 day. If the servant lasts for 1 day, and you're guilty after that, then for sure you're exempt. If he remains alive for 1 or 2 days, he should not be avenged. If he remains alive for 1 day, the master is free. And if he remains for 2 days, then it's even less your cause, less direct death. So isn't it obvious that for 2 days you'd be free, you'd be exempt for the death penalty? Rather, we're talking, it's why I say 1 or 2 days, right? If you last for one and you're putter, you're exempt, and you last for 2, you're for sure exempt. So why am I saying 2? So it's saying one that is like 2 days, 1 day that's like 2 days. What's 1 day that's like 2 days? A 24-hour period. So basically it could span 2 days, but if it's 24 hours, even over a span of 2 days, it has to be a span of 24 hours because that's the only day-like term that can span over 2 days. Because sometimes in Jewish law, a day can mean 12 hours. Is Shabbos closed? Yeah, any 24 hours. Doesn't make a difference. Again, the whole idea is direct death by direct attributing it to the blow. If it lasts 24 hours, we don't care if it's Shabbos or anything. If it lasts 24 hours, then we know that it's indirect. My condolences to your camera. So Rashi says he shall not be avenged, for he is his master's monetary property. But any other person who struck and killed him, even though he waited 24 hours for dying, you are liable. So a regular person, a regular fellow Jew citizen, if you kill them, they could be in bed for a week. But if it's attributed to your blow, you're liable for the death penalty. Any questions? Okay. Let's go on to 22. If men are fighting and they strike a pregnant woman and she miscarries, and there's no fatal injury to her, but the children are miscarried, she doesn't have a fatal injury, the perpetrator is punished. When the woman's husband claims against him, he will pay according to the judge's decision. So this is about the law of causing miscarriage. It says 22 in Rashi, if men are fighting with each other and they're trying to beat each other up, but they accidentally hurt a bystander woman and they hit her and they strike her, nagfu is striking, says Rashi. Nagaf, we see elsewhere in Tehillim, it says, Penti goif be'evin raglecha, so that your foot does not get dashed, struck by a stone. Uviterem yisnagvu raglechem, and when your feet have not been dashed upon dark mountains, v'negif, a stone to be struck or dashed against. Aliyah asayin. From these English translations, you learn, ye old English a little bit, dashed. Never heard that, the term of being struck. But it's a twofer here. You gain the Hebrew and literary English. Aliyah asayin, there will be no fatal injury, but isha to the woman. So we're talking a case of causing a miscarriage. What's the punishment? He gets fined. Rashi says the language is literally he must be punished, and Rashi says it means, we know what this means, of paying monetary value of the loss of the child to the husband. We evaluate her, how much, what is it? So what's the mechanism? How do you pay for the loss of a fetus? So Rashi says, you would evaluate the woman, what her price would be if in the slave market, if she'd be pregnant versus a non-pregnant maidservant being sold. That difference is what he has to pay. If anybody's troubled by this, feel free to raise a question. The perpetrator must be punished. This term means the court shall make him pay money. It's vague, it says punished, but it means money, monetary value. As he places upon him, when the woman's husband claims against him in court to impose upon him a fine for this.
Is that a fine in addition to the compensation, or is that the compensation?
So it's a good question. The question here was, is it in addition to compensation? I'm pretty sure, this is where you got to learn more Talmud and Rambam to know the full details. But anytime you hurt somebody, you are liable for different fines for the pain you caused them, the physical and emotional pain, the damage to their body, if they're out of work, the doctor bills, and then the embarrassment. I'd imagine hitting a woman is the exact same thing. All those things apply. The question here, though, is beyond the woman's personal bodily compensation. The question is that you lost the fetus, and that's beyond the regular person getting harmed. How do you make restitution for causing a miscarriage? So he says it's a monetary fine based on what her market value goes down. So interesting. I don't know how they do it nowadays. If are they able, when someone causes a miscarriage, how do they make good at all? I'm guessing the guy just goes to jail in today's.
That's why there's criminal liability and there's civil liability.
Okay, so criminal, that would be that jail. Civil would be probably the emotional duress. I'm saying, how do they? It's interesting. It's a good question. How does modern law evaluate causing a miscarriage? Is it all the mother's pain, anguish that she is civilly can sue for? I don't know.
Well, the interesting thing is whether the fetus itself has a claim.
Right.
That's the value.
Does the fetus have a claim? And does the fetus have a claim?
I think in many states.
It depends on the state. So federally, not necessarily, but by the state, it might.
It's not a matter of federal.
Right. Right. Okay. Maybe look it up and tell us tomorrow. Or give us. Okay. When the husband places against him, when the woman's husband claims against him in court, he shall pay the value of the miscarried offspring according to the biflilim Plilim means judge's decision. Chav Gimel 23. V'imel soiniyah, if however there is a fatal injury to the woman, right? They accidentally kill her. What's that called when you accidentally manslaughter? Accidental manslaughter. You have this accidental manslaughter. Then you exact life for a life. What does that mean? And if you're a literalist, it means you kill the one who gives the blow. The Rashi explains from the Talmud what it really means. If there is fatal injury in the woman, then you give life for a life. Our rabbis differ in the explanation. Some say that you have to actually give a life for a life. Some say you just pay money. You don't actually kill the perpetrator. Why? Why is he to be exempt according to the second opinion? Because one who intends to kill and kills, because we know there's another law. If you intend to kill Jack, but you accidentally kill Joe, then you are putter. There has to be intent of the, right? If you're trying to kill one guy in the bar and you accidentally, unintentionally kill another guy, you're not liable for the death penalty because you didn't have intent to kill. You intend to kill something, but not that person. Maybe there's other things restitution you have to do. And you have to pay to the heirs the value of what the loss was for the one you accidentally killed.
U.S. criminal law, you can't be liable.
You could be liable for accidentally murdering the wrong person.
Yeah.
By mistake.
Still intended to commit murder.
It's interesting, right? So it argues in the Talmud. Apparently, I didn't. We can look it up. But apparently, there's a argument that you would have capital punishment for the accidental murderer, the unintentional murder. Chavdalad 24, famous verse. Ayin tachas ayin, an eye for an eye. Shein tachas shein, a tooth for a tooth. Yod tachas yod, a hand for a hand. Regel tachas regel, a foot for a foot. 24, eye for an eye. Sima ein chaver neisle dmei ein kama shepach sudam lim kabashu. So what does it mean? An eye for an eye. It says like this: if you blind somebody's eye, you give him the value for the eye. How much his market value went down by being blinded. Besides the pain and the medical and the medical and temporary loss that you pay, you have to pay as a permanent to pay the market value going down. So to all of these things, hand, foot, it's all the market value, not actually chopping a hand for hand, not a limb for a limb. Rabbis deduct this in the famous Gemara in Bava Kama, HaChayva. They prove that contextually it doesn't mean literally. 20, and why did the verse use a language that that if you read it simply, it implies hand for a hand, eye for an eye? The Gemara gives reasons there. 25, kfiya tachas kfiya, petza tachas patza. A burn for a burn, a wound for a wound. Chabura tachas chabura, a bruise for a bruise. Rashi explains what are these different types of injuries. Kviya is a burn caused by fire. Until now, up in verse 24, right? We said all those examples, eye, hand, foot. Those are all things that cause depreciation market value. But now it's giving examples of things that are temporary. They don't cause permanent damage, right? A burn, what does it cause? It heals. A burn heals eventually. So there's no ultimate loss of market value of the person. But there is pain that was caused. And therefore it's saying you have to pay for the pain. For example, if you take a hot spoke and you burn someone with it on his fingernails, there's no permanent damage. But what there will be is pain. You have to pay for the pain of how much a person would be willing, this person would be willing to take this amount of pain for how much money would he be willing to do it for. It sounds interesting how this works,
think that's a concept very similar to pain and suffering concept.
Pain and suffering, right? But how do they judge that? How do they, like, they say how much a person is willing to put his hand in a, in a fire? Like, it doesn't seem like they would do it like that.
They're phrased that way, but I think it amounts to the same thing. How much compensation does he deserve for that?
Deserve for it's implied, you're saying. Okay. Petza himaka matziyadam. A wound is that draws blood. A wound is in a burn means an open wound that you opened his flesh. Navradura in Old French. Rashi again is very, very cutting edge. He used to give the modern idiom in French. In France, he lived in France. Everybody, it all depends on the type of wound. If it is a big wound that depreciates the value, then you pay the devaluation of the person, of the market value of the person. If the victim is also confined to bed, you have to pay for lost work time and medical costs and embarrassment and pain. This part of the verse is apparently superfluous. And in this Gemara, Hachovel in Bava Kama, tract in Bava Kama, it says like this. The rabbis explained it's to pay the victim's pain even where he already pays for damage. For you might say, look at this. Once I pay you for your, let's say the person chops an arm off, God forbid. So you have to pay a lot of money for the devaluation. You might say then, okay, but I don't have to pay pain. I bought the rights to this arm. I paid for this arm. It's mine. So you don't get pain rights to it. The answer is no, you still get pain rights to it. The victim still has pain rights because his nerves and his brain had the pain, not. And we also say that you could have taken the limb in a surgical procedure without pain, with anesthesia, but you didn't. You did it in a bludgeoned way, and that was unnecessary. So you have to pay for the pain that caused by your, whatever method of harm you did. Chabura is a bruise. It's a closed bruise where the blood doesn't come out. Just it wells up inside, makes the flesh get red inside. And this is in Old French, tash, as in spots of a leopard, right? Bruise like spots. Uncles translates chabura in a different way, as in beaten, a blow. He also says elsewhere in Bereshis, shikifan kidum, chavut is beruach, mashkaif, or a threshold, a lintel, because the door bangs on a lintel. He used the Aramaic word for beaten versus bruised, the spot. Similar, I think, idea, just what you are focusing on, the bruise, you're focusing on the beatenness of it. 26. When a person strikes his non-Jewish servant's eye or his maidservant's eye and destroys it, you have to set him free for the compensation of doing that to his eye. Rashi has his eye we're talking of a slave, of a non-Jewish slave, but a Jewish slave, interesting, would not go out with hurting their eye or their tooth. As we say elsewhere, they do not go free like that. Rather, you pay them the restitution.
I mean, the Jewish slave gets a much better deal.
And the Jewish slave is better deal. So yeah, this is So I didn't do proper research this year about to explain this kind of controversial part of the Torah where there's slavery, right? There's sanctioned slavery. So I think the idea there is, first of all, let's put in context. Back then, this is the best deal a slave can get. Right? There was rights. If you harmed it too much, you were liable for the death penalty. If you beat him and you caused a limb to be removed, then he goes free. This is a much greater protection than anything existed in those days. Now, the idea those still is trouble. A non-Jewish slave had greater, was not considered a slave, it's considered more like a long-term servant, and therefore you didn't have any ownership to him. But at the same time, it is troubling that the Torah would say that one human being can own another human being, even non-Jew. So offhand, the way I think Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains it is, again, first of all, in context, this is like the greatest slave rights that existed in those days. Two, the Torah typically does not tell things that the society back then did not accept at all. The Torah puts a lot of restrictions on it and sort of makes it in a more humane way. And ultimately, it makes society rule it out on its own. Had the Torah, I think this is what he quotes, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs quotes from Maimonides, had the Torah just said, you can't have slaves. First of all, it wasn't anything wrong in those days to have a slave. It was totally acceptable on everybody's part in society. Nonetheless, the Torah knew ultimately that's not appropriate, but it didn't outright forbade it entirely, just elevated the status of a slave, made it a lot more restrictive. And it made it even at the time, it elevated the well-being of the slave. But ultimately, the Torah's goal was that society would come to a place with all those restrictions that was on it and all the elevation of the slave's well-being, and society on its own would reject the concept of slavery.
A separate thing, this whole idea of the Kanani, the master injures the Kanani servant, and then all he does is set him free. I mean, he's really, that's like sending the goat to the desert. I mean, that's a death sentence, isn't it? If he's injured, he can't do anything. He gets no compensation.
So first of all, no, he could always hire himself out as a servant.
But he's lost his eye. What value? He has no value.
Oh, if he's
lost his eye or he lost his limb, he gets no compensation and he's out.
First of all, if he has one eye, he has another eye. I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. I'm just saying that there was always a need for servants. There was obviously different levels of servant and different wages.
But it seems to me when the Torah says he sets him free, he's really relieving him of moral obligation. That otherwise he would keep him and he would suffer whatever loss.
That's an interesting question. You're saying better to keep him and keep him on payroll.
Right.
That's an interesting idea. I don't know exactly what, I think the Torah was doing this not to benefit the master. It was as a punishment to the master. You're going to harm your slave too much. You aren't going to have him anymore. So I think that's the idea behind it. You're saying practically the guy's useless. I question, is he useless? I'd imagine there's still jobs he could do. And then he ends up having the jobs with whatever wages he gets. Plus, actually, the thing is, I want to make another idea here is that I have to look this up. Really, to give this a proper class, I'd have to spend an hour every night before going through it. So, forgive me for not. But I think the non-Jewish slave was quasi-Jewish. He had to do certain mitzvahs and not others. He had the obligations of mitzvahs that a woman would have, but he didn't have to do the ones she didn't have to. They had to keep Shabbos. They didn't have to do the positive commandments tefillin do the holidays, ritual mitzvah holidays. But they're sort of quasi-Jewish. When you freed them, I believe they became fully Jewish. Now they become fully Jewish. What would happen to that non-Jewish slave? They become Jewish. Now they're liable as they can get welfare like any Jew from the tzedakah. So I think it wasn't like you were throwing him out to starvation to beg on the streets. On the contrary, became elevated. Again, why is there, the troubling thing that is bothering you is why does the Jewish slave basically is like a contracted worker, and the non-Jewish slave is like a slave, it's like property. So that's what I answered before, is that the Torah, this was totally acceptable in the world. This wasn't considered immoral. Nonetheless, the Torah knew that ultimately this is not right, but it wanted humanity to come to it on its own. So even right away, it put tremendous restrictions and elevation of welfare of the slave property. And everybody was happy. And at the same time, the Torah made it that so much restrictions and not like, and promoting sort of, the every man is an image of God, that ultimately the Jews themselves and society itself rejected slavery. In other words, to be a non-Jewish slave by a Jew was like the best, was like an incredible luck for a slave at that time. Your life was far better, was great, particularly compared to being a slave by a non-Jewish owner. Okay, 26. If a man strikes his, we said already. So Rashi says 26. We're talking about a non-Jewish slave. Right, so the second Rashi, Tachaseinai, if you have to set him free for compensation for his eye. Not just eye, but any of the 24 limbs, fingers, hands, feet, 2 ears, nose, and the tip of the organ, of the reproductive organ. Any of those 24 limbs, you destroy, you harm it, you cause irreparable damage, then he goes free. Why is it saying specifying tooth and eye? We'll see tooth in a second. Why not just say more, non-reparative, restorative limb? The answer is it said those two things. Those two things. Sorry. Those two things. The two common denominators are what make them the proto, the sort of the archetype limb. An eye, if you would have said an eye, you would have said an eye is something that it's created by the human being's birth. So too, only limbs that are created at birth, but a tooth is created later on. So you might think you're exempt. You don't have to send him out for a tooth. So I had to say tooth. If it would have just said tooth, it would have said a tooth is something that the servant goes free even for a baby tooth, a baby slave, even though it is replaced. So it says, if it's an eye, he's saying that will not come back. So between tooth and eye, it's something that any limb that does not come back, even if it's created later on in the. Okay. Chavzayim, 27. If he knocks out his servant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he must set him or her free. He must set him or her free as compensation for his or her tooth, as I said. Rashi, Pasuk 28, the migach sharas yishav, an ox scores a man or a woman, or he or she dies, the ox must be stoned, and its meat may not be eaten. When an ox scores a man or a woman, or she, right, so your ox scores a man or a woman, and they die. Then, the ox is stoned. Don't eat its meat, but the owner of the ox is absolved from punishment. Rashi, doesn't have to be literally an ox, it could be any animal you own. If your animal, your pet, as an example, a dog, your dog harms somebody in modern day. It just back then, having an ox was the common, animal that was owned, and that could hurt somebody. Its meat may not be eaten. So first of all, the animal, if it's stoned, what do you mean it can't be eaten? Why? You obviously can. If you stone it, you didn't slaughter it, right? So obviously you can't eat it. It's kind of like they say the punishment is stoning, and then I know you can't eat the meat. So it's including a particular case that, let's say, the ox was determined in court to be a killer ox and liable for the death penalty. So the answer, even if you, before it gets stoned, you quickly go and slaughter it, the meat is still forbidden because it was a condemned ox. Where do I know that it's forbidden not just to eat it, but to even sell it to a non-Jew or sell it, use it for the hide? Torah teaches us by saying the owner of the ox is clean, is absolved. It's to be used in a similar sense elsewhere, that that he gets cleaned out of his possessions. It's not just that the owner is innocent, is absolved from punishment, but he's cleaned from possessions. He can't have any benefit from this possession. That is the Medrash explanation. But the simple meaning is literally that since it said regarding a muad, a repeat offender killer ox, it's called a muad. The 3 times it harms, then it's considered a convicted felon ox, a presumed killer. It's called a muad. Then it says, by a muad, it says its owner shall be put to death. The Torah is requiring, when it talks about a tam, that the owner of the ox will be absolved of punishment. Right. So let's see Chavtes. So basically in 28, we're talking about a type of ox that did it a first time offense. It killed somebody the first time. So the law is the ox is put to death. It's innocent. It's forbidden to benefit, but the owner doesn't get killed for it. But if the ox is nagachu, it is a goring ox, mitmel shulshaim, that gored on previous occasions, this is the 3rd time, and the owner was warned, the owner did not protect it, did not guard it. And then this killer ox, presumed killer ox, behemis isha, and it kills a man or a woman, hashar yisakel, the ox is put to death by stoning, bagam ba'alav yumas, but its owner is also put to death. Says Rashi, if the ox kills yesterday, the day before, meaning it does 3 gorings, and its owner had been warned. Huad means warning with witnesses. Then it kills a person. When it says that it gored, I only know in verse 28, it said when the ox gores, I only know about goring, right? Goring is with the horns, I think. Where do I know that if it kills with biting or pushing or crushing, other forms of, violent ox behavior? Where do I know that it's also included in this and you're also liable? The owner is liable. So it says here, behemis. The Torah is explained that every word is instructive. V'gam ba'alav yumas, its owner will be put to death. B'dei shemayim, the owner put to death by the hand of heaven. Yachol b'dei adam, I would think by the hands of human act. Talmud learner mois yumas. The verse tells us that it's not put to death by the court down here on earth. He's liable for death by heaven. We learn elsewhere that you put to death someone who kills by their own act, not by their property, not by their ox act. So when it says you're liable for death act, it's that you're liable. God is going to keep the score, but you don't have to. You have to pay civil damages, criminal damages. God is condemning you. All right, how much longer? Oh, it's long. Some days it's 30. In for Yushas Allah, the law is that the atonement fine should be imposed upon him, and the atonement fine should be imposed upon him. And also, and he shall pay whatever is imposed upon him. Love, whatever is imposed upon him as a ransom for his life. Says Rashi, if the atonement fine is imposed upon him, the word im here usually means if. Here means not if, it means when. So im is a word that can have a few meanings. Here it means when you impose an atonement fine for civil damages. The owner has to pay atonement. So he has to pay for the ransom of his life. Whose life? The victim's life or his life? Remember, so there's different opinions. Rabbi Shmuel says the victim's life you're paying, the atonement value. Rabbi Akiva says your life, the owner's life. Because again, this is a monetary payment to get yourself out of heavenly death penalty. So Rabbi Akiva says,
But he pays it to the victim.
The victim's family. Say 31. Even if he gores a boy or a girl, this law shall apply to it. Rashi 31. A child, a boy that's a child, or a girl that's a child, a minor. So why is it telling you this? When it said that if you kill a man or a woman, I would think only if you kill adults. When it says a child, it includes also, it's basically, this is the verse that includes killing a minor in the same liability of killing an adult. It's from this verse. 32 in the verse, in Eved Yigach Sharimama, if an ox scores a servant or a maidservant, then the Kesef Shleshim Shkalim Yitam Ladenev. Then the owner of the ox has to pay 30 silver shekels to the master, and the ox, ox is stoned. This refers to non-Jewish servants. 30 silver shkalim. This is a decree, a special decree of the Torah, whether the servant is worth 1,000, very expensive servant, or it's worth very minimal. A shekel weight is the same as 4 gold dinars, which is together half an ounce according to the standard weight of cologne. He knew this by way of tradition of his teachers. Okay. 33, v'chiyaf tachish bar. Next case. This is famous Gemara, just for the record. If you're learning if a man, it's a case of nizikin, of damages. So prototype 1 was an ox. Archetype number 2 of a damager is a pit. If a man opens a pit or digs a pit and does not cover it, an ox or donkey fall into it. Says Rashi 33. If a man opens a pit, he opens a pit that had been covered, and then a manhole. For example, a pit. If you open in the street a manhole, it was closed, and you opened it. Or if you dig a pit. Here it means literally pit. Why are you telling me this? If you open an existing pit, take off the cover, for sure you dig it from scratch, right? Like why are you giving, the Torah doesn't have to give every specific case of this archetype case. Just you open a hole, whether it's if you open a hole, for sure if you dig it from scratch. Rather, this is coming to include liability for one who digs a pit deeper than the previous digger. So for example, let's say I dig a pit 5 inches. That's not enough to kill or to harm somebody significantly. But then someone goes and digs it 10 feet deep, then you might say, well, I didn't start it. No, you finished it. You're now guilty. If you don't cover the pit, this implies if you did cover it, you're innocent. And we are talking in the case of in a public domain. You dig a pit in a public domain. So just, the archetype case is if you dig a pit in a public domain. Gary, you with me? Shar Chamar.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. An ox or a donkey. Did I skip a verse? Oh, no. Yeah. And a donkey, an ox or a donkey. Why an ox or a donkey? Say an animal. Why not be more generic? The truth is, this is applying to any animal that of a person's, a dog, a rabbit. But why does they do ox or donkey? So it's to teach us some details by cross-referencing. Shar, we always learn it from the classical case of a shar, of an ox of Shabbos. And just like there, it says you have to let your ox or your donkey rest on Shabbos. but it really means any of your animals if let rest. So too, whenever it says here, when it says ox, it means any ox. So why say ox and donkey if it really means any animal? Why be specific and have to know it from a inference by a cross reference? The answer is there's a special law that if you kill, if the pit harms an ox, it's excluding the case of a person getting damaged by it. If a donkey, if a person gets harmed by this pit, he's innocent. You're not liable. If inanimate vessels get hurt in this pit, you're also not liable. Only shor v'chamar to exclude a person or a donkey getting harmed. Let's see Rashi, the verse further. Baal habar yishalem. Just the case. If a man falls into a pit and dies, the one who dug the pit is not liable for his death. This law is the decree of Torah. It's a decree of Torah to exempt you for causing the death of somebody, because I don't know the reason why. And also, if vessels get broken in this pit, you're also, the owner of the pit is patur, is exempt. 34. The owner of the pit shall pay, he shall restore the animal's full monetary. Baal habar yishalem, the owner of the pit shall pay for the animal. Kesef, money, yashiv levailov, the monetary value of the animal that was killed should be returned to its owner, paid to the owner. While the dead animal also stays in the owner, it remains in its owner's property. Says Rashi, the owner of the pit, the owner of the hazard, even though the pit is not actually his, because what we said before, we're talking you dig a pit or open a manhole in a public street. But the Torah, because you caused the hazard, it's like you own that property for the damages, but not really own it. He shall restore, he has to return, the owner of the pit, the hazard maker has to return the value to the owners. So he can return, he can pay any type of monetary value. He can barter, he can give stuff, he can give furs, he can give brand if he wants. But the dead animal will belong to the one who suffered the damage. Basically, we evaluate this. I have a horse. And the horse falls inside this pit. It basically dies. It was worth $100. It dies. Now the carcass is worth a mere $10. So there was $90 of damage to my animal here. So the owner of the pit has to pay $90, but the owner of the horse takes the carcass for the last 10. He keeps the 10 that it's worth, and he gets the difference of value he gets paid from the owner. And you pay him, he who caused the damage pays him besides the rest of the payment for his damage, the remainder. 35. A man's ox attacks his fellow man's ox and it dies. So now it's not ox to human, it's ox to another ox. And one ox kills another person's ox. So what do you do? You sell the living ox, you divide its value. You divide the value of the dead animal. Let's see Rashi. We're learning here basic, like huge swaths of Talmud, just so you know, in summary form. When ox yigoif means thrusts, pushes with his, whether he pushes with his horns, whether with his body, whether with his feet, he's thrusting himself. Whether he bites, any of this is all included in, as we said before, is included in nigifa, in thrusting. So negifa is a term like blowing, dealing a blow. Shar ish, the ox of a man. Shar shal ish, the ox of a man. Umachos ashar v'gomer, they shall then sell the living ox. The verse is speaking of where the two oxen were equal in value. They killed the ox. They sold the ox where the two oxen were equal in value. The ox was equal to 200. Again, the verse is speaking of where the two ox were equal in value. Okay, so one ox is with $200 and it kills another ox with $200. That's the case here. The behind the between the lines. So when okay, just trying to understand it. If it thus teaches that a tam, so this is a case of a tam. A tam, what's a tam? A tam is a unpresumed hazard ox. It was not a raging bull. It was a tame ox, and then out of the blue, it killed another ox, another person's ox. That's called a tam, an innocent. It's not as it wasn't proven to be a hazard. So this teaches us that you have to when your ox for the first or second time kills another ox, you are liable for half damages. So in our case, let's say 200 versus 200. A 200 ox killed $200 ox. And let's say now the carcass is worth $20. So you have surviving, the attacker ox is alive, is worth $200, and the dead ox is worth 20. So you have 220 total of their value. So the right. So the guy who lost has to gets 100 of what the attacker ox is worth, and
But they can't split it evenly if they're not the same value, because then somebody's getting it.
Yeah, I'm forgetting my basic Gemara Talmud. So even if they're not invaluable, right? So so let's say a cheap $20 ox kills $1,000 ox, right? So he ends up getting, and the $1,000 ox is still with $500. So I'm trying to understand,
They're not the same. It's easy. I mean,
200.
they're not the same value that the one who owned the less expensive ox is getting a windfall.
Right.
By whoever, whether that was the attacker.
Why don't you though just pay? So if my example, $200 value ox kills a $200 ox. The carcass of the dead ox is worth $20. So you say you split the $20 in half, and you split the $200 of the attacker ox. So the victim gets a total of $110.
Yeah, that wouldn't be right, because the victim only had a $20 ox to begin with.
No, I said he had 200. It was devalued. But let's say it was a $20 ox. Let's say it was a cheap ox. It would be wrong for him to get.
Cheap ox, then getting extra money. You split the whole thing. And I guess the idea of getting rid of the attacker is
You pay the damage from the attacker.
you don't want to have him around.
I don't think it's that. I think it's that you can only be liable up to a certain amount of your ox.
Well, they say to sell it though. You're not just
You sell right.
selling it to after getting rid of it.
I never heard it was that it was, you probably want to sell it anyways. You don't want to have this liability in your hands, but it's more that, so the verse is only talking about when, as you said, they're equal and that the top pays half damages. So what was half damages? Why does he be half the damage done to his animal? We evaluate him. When there's an animal that was $200, now it's worth 20. So the damage is $180, right? 180. An animal is worth $200. Now it's worth 20. So there's a damage of $180. I always thought you have to pay just $90, half the damage. You know what I'm saying?
Not being offensive, but I thought I got enough of this in Contracts 101. I don't, this is torture.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. Verse
I
30.
don't think I'm gonna have any damages related to oxen in my
Yeah, this
backyard.
applies to a pet. Let's say a dog harms another dog. And this is the same idea. Here's the cost.
Take my cats, please.
But besides your cat, you got to also pay for the. If one animal's so they sell the live ox and divide the proceeds, and they may also divide the value of the carcass. This way, the owner of the attacking ox compensates the owner of the attacked ox for half his loss. So give examples on the bottom. $200. Owner of the attacked ox. So 250s, you have owner of the attacked ox is equal to half his loss plus the ads. Okay, I didn't know that. I simply am learning. I'm learning basics here. I'm sorry. So it gives in the Kahas Chumash, which you see on page 461, it gives an example. If ox A, attacker, killer ox, kills the victim ox, and they're both worth 200. So the bait was you, as I said, you sell both of them. The carcass is worth $50, and the killer ox, with $200 still. So what do? You sell both of them, and you divide the pool, which is now 125, 250, right? 250 divided by 5, it is sold for 250. You divide it in half. Everybody walks with 125. So what comes out of here? The owner of the victim, he got his carcass plus half of the damages. So that was, what was the damages of his? 150 divided in half, 75. 75 plus 50 is of the remaining is 125. And the damager, the killer ox owner, he loses also half the damages that he caused. Okay, cool. So why did the verse use this expression and not simply say pay half? So this is the question Rashi asks. Why didn't you say Yishalem Chetze, just pay half? It's to teach us that a tam so it's to teach us a specific extra detail. That a tam, remember, a unpresumed killer ox, it doesn't usually didn't do this before, it pays for the damage only up to its own value. And if it gored and then died, the one who suffered the damage takes only the carcass of the killer ox. And if its value does not reach half the damage done to his animal, he loses out. Or an ox worth, let's say an ox with 100 kills an ox with 500. The owner of the dead ox only take up to the full value of the attacker ox. Basically like this. Let's say I have a $100 ox and it kills a $1,000 ox. Now that $1,000 ox is now worth the carcass $500, but the owner lost $500 by your puny ox. So you might say, how much is the damage? $500. The owner should be on the hook for half of that, which is $250. The answer is no. He can only the victim can only take up to the full value of the attacking ox. So he would lose that. He wouldn't even get half the damages. That's why I didn't say you take half, because you have to do this sort of weird thing where you sell both of them, you calculate both their value, and then divide it in half, and then that's how it works out. Each one suffers the loss, takes half the loss. 36. How much longer?
Right, basically, that it's an accident. Nobody did anything.
It's right. It's an accident. So you have to pay. You can't walk away, but you're not fully liable.
Right. So I can see how it's.
This is the beauty. I got to tell you, this is the beauty. I really want to say that of learning Rashi. You are gaining access to a whole Gemara here. It would take you years or a year to study in a Talmud class. You're basically getting it from Rashi direct on the verse. 36. Oh, on the other hand, as we said, let's say it is a dangerous ox that was proven to kill, and it did not guard, the owner did not guard it properly. Shalem yishalem shar tachashar. Its owner must pay an ox, a whole ox, as compensation. And the dead animal remains in its owner's property. Let's see Rashi. If it was known, meaning it was not an accident. It was a vicious ox. It killed once, today and yesterday and the day before, meaning this is the third bout of its killing oxen. The owner has to pay full damages. And the dead ox remains by the victim, and the killer ox's, the mazik, the inflicting ox's owner has to pay the remainder of the damage. It's a full value. 37. Now another case. If a man steals an ox, a sheep, or a goat, and slaughters it, or sells it. So it's you stealing livestock and you're slaughtering it or you're selling it. So the answer is you have to pay 5 times the price if it was for an ox, but 4 times the price for doing that to a sheep, stealing and slaughtering / selling. 37. 5 times for an ox. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, the Torah, I'm sorry, 1 second. Let me just tell someone I'm meeting. Okay. Full compensation for damage. Okay. The omnipresent has, okay. The Torah has consideration for the dignity of his creatures. For stealing an ox, which walks by itself, and the thief did not suffer indignity by carrying on his shoulders, you have to pay 5, because it was an easy steal. Just let the ox out. But a sheep, you have to sort of hold it, and it's all, it's indignant, it's kind of embarrassing. You only pay 4-fold because you were embarrassed through this. Right? Meir says, come see how great the virtue of work is. For stealing an ox, which you caused to desist from its work, you pay 5-fold. But stealing a sheep, which didn't cause desist from work, you pay 4-fold. So they have different criteria of why the difference in price. For the ox, for the sheep, Shnana Kasev, the verse repeated the words shar and seh to tell us that the rule to pay fourfold and fivefold compensation applies specifically to an ox and a sheep.
Sheep is not a working animal, right? Isn't that the point? The sheep is, an ox is, the sheep is sheared.
Right, that was our mayor's thing. That's why you only pay 4. Right. So the verse actually repeats itself to be right. It's not by any, usually this is about any animals, right? Sure. We say ox is just an archetype. Here's another, actually means specifically an ox or specifically a sheep/goat, not a dog, not a llama, whatever. Aleph, next case, 22. We're almost done. If a thief was discovered while breaking in the mace and he was struck down and he died, his death is not considered manslaughter, bloodshed. Rashi, if a thief discover breaking into a tunnel, he's breaking into the house. He has no blood, meaning it's not considered murder to kill him, for he's a dead man. Why? The Torah is telling you that if someone comes to kill you, you preempt him by killing him first. And this burglar definitely came to kill you. How do you know? Because he's aware that no person holds himself back when he sees somebody stealing his property and stays silent. So he knew that if he would get caught, then he would probably rise up and kill. The assumption is that a thief that comes, that if he gets caught, he would kill, and therefore you're allowed to kill him first. There's an exception though. However, just as the sun shines, bringing peace, if it is clear that this thief was peaceful and had not deadly intent, shalem mishalem, his death to be considered bloodshed. Im ein loy. So basically, if you know the thief was not going to kill, then you can't kill him. The thief has to pay, but if he does not have what to pay you back for, if you're stealing, he gets sold for his theft. Says Rashi. Rashi 2. What does it mean if the sun shone on him? This is a metaphorical expression. It's absolutely clear to you that he's at peace with you, just like the sun that is a source of peace in the world. So too is obvious to you that he's not coming to kill, even if the owner would stand up against him. Meaning, what's his example? Let's say a person's father comes to steal. A father, with his mercy, would never kill his son, even if he would get caught in the act. So the son cannot kill the father thief. Domim, if you did kill him, then it's as if you killed his blood, and it's like he's a loving person, and it's considered murder if the householder kills him. Shalem shalem, he, the thief, must pay for the property which he stole, for he is not liable for the death penalty. But uncle is translated if witnesses saw him, chose a different way to explain the verse, namely, if witnesses discovered the thief before the householder came, and when the householder came towards him, they warned him not to kill, he is liable for the death penalty if he kills him. If uncle is translated, uncle is he has to pay for what he stole, but he's not. The thief is liable for property. Uncle says the witnesses saw him. He chose a different way to translate it. If witnesses discovered the thief before the householder came, and when the householder came towards him, they warned him not to kill the thief, then he's liable. Basically, if there's witnesses there, the thief would not kill him because people saw him, he wouldn't come to kill because then he'd get really caught. So therefore, you can't kill him for your property. Basically, if there's witnesses there, you can't use a shotgun on the intruder because he's no way going to kill you with the witnesses there. So you can't kill him back. 3. If the stolen object is actually found in his possession, whether it be an ox, if the stolen object is actually found in his possession, whether it be an ox, a chamar, a donkey, or a sheep, Chaim alive, Shnaim Yishlem, he shall pay 2 living animals. The stolen object is actually found in his hand, in his possession, and he did not slaughter or sell it. Whether it be an ox or a donkey, anything is included in the law requiring double repayment of its theft, whether it be animate or inanimate. For it says elsewhere, for sheep, a garment, or any other lost article, he shall pay double to his fellow man. So, any object you have to pay back. So why does it say these things? Probably because of some common denominator. The law is for other things. If you steal them, for anything you steal, you have to pay back 2. You have to pay the value. If it's a dead one, if you sell a carcass, you pay 2 carcasses. You pay double. It's a deterrent. All right. We came this far as to the Dvar Torah. Long. Sometimes the Chumash is really Parsha Insights, Monday. If a person opens a pit or digs a pit, so we learned the laws of a pit, right? It's the archetype of being liable for hazard making. The laws of damages are among the most comprehensible laws in the Torah, since they are seemingly based on human logic. However, God provides us with several reminders that this part of the Torah too is a reflection of God's unfathomable will, even if it's 90% logical. For example, here, logically, there's simply no difference between different types of damage caused by the same pit, right? Like, what's the difference if we say you're liable for an ox or a donkey, but not liable for a person getting killed in the pit or for, vessels being damaged. This demonstrates even the Torah's civil laws are not just another man-made legal system that suffers from the imperfections of such systems, even the best systems. They are God's will, which by definition is beyond our ability to fully comprehend. Somehow, when we follow these laws, this is going to cause the best justice. This awareness helps us see these laws in their true light, as the means God provides us to refine, elevate our physical and material lives, and serve to inspire us to pursue these goals enthusiastically. So the fact that there are some details that are not entirely logical is to keep us a little bit super rational, a little bit mystical, and remind us this is God-given law, not just man-made law.